So a couple of weeks ago, we talked about compassion, and it was kind of a general overview discussing different facets of it. And, I asked the question at the beginning and at the end, do you see the people in your life and around you? Do you actually see them? And tonight, we'll just consider this compassion to the compassioning, because to be more specific on that subject, and on that subject of seeing people and valuing people, it's one of those things that we run into all the time. Like, the entire function of the church, it doesn't exist without that value. See, if a church exists, in any kind of community as well, it doesn't really matter. You can look at the church, and the church should be functioning like this, even though most of the time it doesn't seem to. But at any point in time where you see a functioning society or functioning community, it works on the grounds of people seeing each other, appreciating each other, caring and functioning. See, without that, you get bad communities and bad societies, and they don't really work. They just kind of do stuff and then go through death throes and eventually die in some fiery fashion. And this is one of those things that we run into. I mean, if you look at history, for example, you'll see we could use the example of medieval courts and kings and so on. Everything was so duplicitous. They were constantly levying over each other for trying to gain advantage. How'd that work? I mean, do you know how many... do you remember how, like, the line of French nobles that started with Charlemagne continued all the way until modern day? There were never any rebellions where, the French people gathered up their monarchs and beheaded them or anything like that. That never happened. Or, setting up legal statutes over the British kings and monarchs in order to dictate that they couldn't actually have any significant power or anything like that. The point is that in all of these situations, eventually it just didn't work. And the same is true when we look at the modern church. A lot of times it just doesn't really work because the focus is in the wrong place. We talked last week about how, or not last week, but the week before. We talked last time about the whole focus, and on the message about sabotage, about how often the focus becomes about following rules more than about being something. If people working to try to look like they're following the rules, trying to look like Christians rather than being Christians. One of the verses for tonight is something that Paul talks about in Romans 13. Starting in verse 8, let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt of love, the continuing debt to love one another. For he who loves his fellow man has fulfilled the law. The commandments, do not commit adultery, do not murder, do not steal, do not covet, and whatever other commandment there may be are summed up in this one rule. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no harm to its neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. And do this understanding the present time, the hour has come for you to wake up from your slumber, because your salvation is nearer now than when we first believed. The night is nearly over, the day is almost here. So let us put aside the deeds of darkness and put on the armor of light. The thing is that what Paul's kind of alluding to, specifically talking about the law of love and about the value of loving other people, he calls attention to this same thing that Jesus talked about as well. It's just the point that, Don't be a dick to the people around you, to put it in the most base form. But it's more than that. When you look around at the things that you're doing and to be aware of yourself and kind of your own machinations, is to understand what you actually would accept, what you're actually okay with. If you don't like people manipulating you, don't manipulate other people. If you don't like people lying to you, don't lie to other people. If you don't like it when somebody cuts you off in traffic, don't cut other people off in traffic and then justify it. It's really simple. Extremely simple. But see, the thing of it is that because we're oftentimes so self-involved, we don't actually give cause for this to reach us. And what's more than that is some of us have a really hard time seeing that we're not actually who we like to say we are. I like to think of myself as not being a proud person. Then I turn around and do something purely out of pride. I won't admit to something, or I won't acknowledge a fault of mine or something like that, purely because I don't want to acknowledge that that's actually a problem. I'd rather see myself in a very different light. So as a result of that, and usually it's not even conscious, on some subconscious level, there's a wall within me that says, well, I can't be that. I'm not that. But I am. And the only way that changes if that's brought forward and exposed. Because see, the thing about it is with any problem, it only exists as long as you pretend it's not a problem. See, if you acknowledge a problem, you want it to change. A lot of people don't want to change. A lot of people want to see themselves as being okay right where they are. And I'm just going to be real blunt with everybody. That's a complete load of bullshit. Entirely and wholly. Nobody's actually at that point. If you're telling yourself you are, you're lying to yourself and to everybody around you. Very basic principle. And that's one of the things that we deal with on a routine basis. See, every follower of Jesus should be doing that. Should be looking into themselves and where they're at. Introspection is an important part of living life, period, but especially so for a Christian. If you're not aware of what you're doing, if you don't even care to be aware of what you're doing, then how are you supposed to move forward? How are you supposed to grow? And I've had this discussion with people where they stand up and say, well, the blood of Jesus covers everything. It's like, really? Does it? Yeah, it covers you. It covers your sins. But at the same time, you're still there. You're still doing it. And if God brings something to your attention and you choose to ignore it because you want to just continue being that way, you're now at fault. At which point, that covering sits in a different circumstance. Because that's you effectively telling God, no, I'm not going to change. What's he supposed to do with that? See, we need to take responsibility for ourselves and where we're at. And that goes for every single person. Every single person. There's nobody that's absolved of that. And even more so when you stand outside of the church. Because it doesn't really matter. In any kind of society or culture, people have to take responsibility for their own actions in order for said culture to function. If they don't, it's just chaos. It's a lot of people reacting to other people who are reacting to themselves and whatever is going on with them. It's just an incessant thing. And what's more is the more self-involved we are, the less we're able to appreciate the people around us, and we're just going to create cultures of division and strife and deceit. And it all just perpetuates itself over and over and over again. So as it pertains to bringing the subject of compassion into this, like I said last time, compassion is not focused on you. If the intent where I'm going to be compassionate towards somebody else or have compassion in general, to be a compassionate person is not to be focused on what I want and need right now, but it is focused on the person in front of me and what they're suffering from. My only part is the desire to alleviate it. See, societies that function on that tend to go quite a bit further. And that's something that's been seen many times over. And the irony is a lot of times those cultures that ultimately fall away from that end up eventually crumbling. So even when we look at like the early church, Christianity is one of the only religions that was spread not by the death of other people, but by the death of its own people. See, it gained prominence in Rome because people were dying for this religion. They were being burned at the stake, they were being tortured, they were being fed to animals in the arenas, all these different things. Emperor Nero crucified Christians and used them and torched their bodies to use them as light posts in Rome. So
metal.
Very metal. He also hooked up with his mom a lot, so I guess that's metal too. The point is that we have this whole thing where this is how Christianity spread. A lot of people aren't aware of it. They look at the Crusades, and the funny thing about that is Christianity already existed in the areas that the Crusades were taking place in. Christianity had spread a long time before the Crusades ever happened. It had already become the official religion of Rome centuries before. And that was the result of a gradual shift. The Romans saw something where these people were willing to die for this belief. But more than that, within the Christian communities, they tried very hard to live by the standards that Jesus had taught. Everyone was a follower of the way. And they were even the term Christian was a mocking thing. Little Christs. That was the joke. But the point is that their focal point was on living this life and living in their communities, and they really had to take care of each other. When you read stories in Acts, you see things about Christians showing up and in their groups, and when it came time to give, people were dropping titles to houses and things like that. They were giving up property to be given over to whoever needed it. People were legitimately in a place of really giving their all into this thing because they wanted to really live this. The zeal was there, the drive was there, and they wanted to help each other. They wanted to take care of each other. They had to.
But years ago, I was
In a lot of ways, our culture, whatever Christianity might be today, it at one point existed in a very different state, and one that was very much so functioning in this law of love, showing compassion, showing love, taking care of each other. It wasn't focused on people weren't focused on what they could get out of this as much. And yeah, obviously there were people who were different and outliers and so on. But in general, this is what started it, and this is what motivated it to move forward. And this is what changed people's minds and hearts about this. So they went from being lampposts to having the Emperor of Rome in Constantine I proclaim Christianity the official religion of the empire.
Salt and light.
And that's the thing, is this is a very powerful image for people. What changes people's minds about all this it's not about winning a fight or dictating a rule. And that's one of the big problems that we run into with a lot of our walks and our faiths, especially in our culture. See, if I get into a debate with Grant and I utterly obliterate him, does that win him for the cross? No, not
Like
usually.
that would happen. Whatever.
It doesn't actually achieve anything. Usually what happens is people just stand back and kind of like turtle up on what they believe. Because nobody likes to be, belittled and berated and told that they're wrong and all these other things. And I've been guilty of this in the past. I've been very much so one to debate people when I was younger. I felt like it was important to have the truth be known more than anything else. I also learned a lot about telling the truth in a different way that wasn't so brutal. But the point is that a lot of us focus on how we're going to win the day. And we're not interested in what's happening with the other person. I mean, that's a part of it. The desire to change their mind is there, but it's also that we're going to beat them. We're gonna bludgeon them into worshiping, into knowing God. It doesn't really work. The truth of the matter is that what helps people really move into a place to even come to know who God is to provide an opportunity for them to meet Him themselves. And that's not easy, and a lot of people are content to say no to that. I mean, the reality is a lot of people are content to not believe in Him in general. And that doesn't matter if we're talking about the church or the world or anything. I know a ton of Christians who don't actually believe in God. They worship, they go to church, they worship, they read their Bibles obsessively, they can quote it back and forth. They have no idea who God is. If you ask anything about Him personally, they're just like, He doesn't talk to His people. Oh, okay. The Bible it's a different world, right? Right. He talked to His people in the Bible, but He would never do that anymore. Because somewhere that changed. Because God changes all the time, right? And that's the thing, is that in order for us to even be able to begin in these processes, a lot of times we need that particular thing. Talked about God and kind of giving Him personage and allowing that to be seen, because that's really important for us moving forward in any particular way. If we're followers of Jesus and we proclaim to believe in God, then we claim to believe in something that's alive. This isn't like so many old religions where, you're going to build a shrine or an idol or something like that. No, the concept of Jesus Christ and of God is that the Holy Spirit, when you're saved, becomes a part of you. There's a whole other entity and identity that becomes something that's you as much as God, and you live together for the rest of your time and then beyond your time. So if that's where we sit, there are things that are going to need to change and things that are going to change as a result. You can't have God inside of you without it having some significant effect on your personage. But see, the process of getting there is difficult because there's a lot of trial and a lot of struggle. In the Bible, we read the story of Jesus talking to the rich young ruler, and the man comes up and says, he'll give he'll give anything to follow Jesus, and Jesus tells him to give up all of his wealth. The guy gets really sad and walks away. And it's always understood at that point that a lot of people recognize the fact that it's very hard for somebody who's rich to truly give their lives to God because they have so much in life. But the thing is that it's also really hard for the people who have nothing to give themselves to God, because all they have is themselves. And God asks for your whole life. If you're rich and you have everything that you could possibly desire, it's really hard to give that up when God's saying, give it up. Surrender this to me, surrender your life to me. But when you have nothing and you just have yourself and you're in survival mode all the time, your function is that you're going to be looking to survive. And as a result, when God says, give your life to me, you're going to say, yeah, sure, I have nothing. Well, that includes you. And if you are the thing in question, that means surrendering yourself as well. That is damn hard. When the only person that you've ever had to rely on is you, and you're constantly in a state of needing to protect yourself, and suddenly you've got this cosmic entity that you may or may not entirely believe in telling you that, he wants you to rely on him. No. You might say yes, but then when it comes down to it and you're supposed to actually put that into practice, you're going to say no. It happens all the time. I've been doing this for a really long time. I've watched it many times over. I've done it many times over. I grew up poor. It's taken a lot of self-sacrifice to get to even anywhere that I could say that I am. People have a very hard time. The church is full of poor people because the poor people have something that they want to hope in. They're open to that. But there's also something that's very difficult to give up in the process involving ourselves. If we stop protecting ourselves, that's a scary place to be in, because we suddenly have to trust other people. We have to look at the people in the room around us and trust that they're not going to bury us, that they're not going to betray us, that they're not going to do a bunch of things to hurt us. No. You don't want to do that. So we talk about the law of love and the value of it. We talk about compassion and the value of it, because without those things, no one grows. We need to have a place where people can, in fact, sit down and believe that they're going to be taken care of, because the process of coming to know God is really damn hard, especially when you're coming out of survival mode. It's a scary place to be, where you're going to be vulnerable and have all of that mess be opened up. Everything that came with that, the abuses that you've suffered, the pain that you've gone through, the rejection, the abandonment, the despair, the times that you've wanted to kill yourself. You need an environment that's safe. And if you can't look at the people around you, in your community, and recognize that they're a safe place, then there's no point to being there. It's always going to be a struggle. And obviously this doesn't inhibit everybody from receiving God or anything like that. There are plenty of people, I can think of 3 in this room right now who have come to know God very, very, very well, despite everything that they've gone through, as they've pushed and pulled and wanted to. But it wasn't easy, was it? And we're all still going through things where we struggle to trust in Him, aren't we? So obviously we're not past that mark either.
You know, they have this nice big table in here, they have tables over here.
So
It is exception.
the value here when we talk about compassion is creating that space for people to come and be able to let that stuff out and to have it be addressed. To be provided the opportunity, to be provided the atmosphere in which we can be vulnerable, in which we can grow, in which we can change. And that's obscenely important. We always want to come at it from the stance of, of being hands off. Everyone's a seeker, but no one's a leader. Leadership is scary. Or you're a leader, but you're going to lead your own thing. Off on your own, by yourself. Inevitably, you have to find a place to settle. Otherwise, you're not really doing anything, are you? I've known way too many people who come in and out of church groups and they'll tell me that they're a leader. It's like, okay, who are you leading? Well, lots of people. Where are they? At some point, we have to stop deluding ourselves, and at some point, we have to stop pushing for ourselves and defending ourselves and so on. At some point, we have to come to places where we can stop and rest and be vulnerable and be open and to let healing actually begin within our hearts and souls. And for those of us on the other side of that, it's important that we provide a place and an opportunity for that. And that's never going to exist as long as we're trying to judge every single person that comes through the doors. Or we're so busy trying to defend ourselves from them. If some new person shows up and joins a church, and you look at them and say, they're a mess, they're going to hurt people. Yeah, of course they're going to hurt people. Everybody does. Everybody goes through processes of hurting people and changing the environment as they try to find their niche inside of it. It's never easy. And in order for things to reach some level of stasis, there has to be a process, and there have to be people who are going to be involved and willing to help elevate them in that process. And that's the thing, is where it's important to start developing, a community like that, where we're going to be able to stand back and say, okay, let's focus on taking care of the person here involved, rather than focusing on, whether or not they're a threat. I mean, if they're a threat, can you not handle that? If I look over at Dusty and recognize that she's a threat to me in some way, shape, or form,
Damn right.
does that mean that I'm suddenly, am I not actually then ready to handle that threat? Am I gonna just cave and fall apart at whatever Dusty's gonna do? She's gonna manipulate me? Because I'm not looking for it, right? Obviously. Part of even being able to recognize that something's a threat is being able to recognize it's a threat so you can protect yourself, instead of cowering at the idea that they're gonna do something that's gonna hurt you, or they're gonna betray you in some way. I don't know why everyone gets it in their head that, okay, this thing is a problem, we have to destroy that problem in order to fix the situation. All that happens is that you might wantonly destroy something, and then you're left with nothing. You maintain a status quo while destroying the intent and focus of the group involved. there are so many church groups that do this exact thing, or whole churches in some unfortunate cases. This is a problem, let's remove it. Does that actually like help in any way, shape, or form? Because there are a lot of problems that are actually really easy to handle if somebody's just willing to try.
Well, if somebody recognizes somebody as a threat, per se, then it wouldn't necessarily be that person. You would have to question yourself. And you'd have to be like, okay, where in my own emotional process am I at, and taking accountability and being like, why do I recognize this as a threat?
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it's really a problem within yourself
Exactly.
that you're projecting on another person.
Exactly. So, with that being stated, at what point do we start letting this down, or letting this guard down, so that we can actually develop something? That's the importance here. Like the whole premise of a church as a community is a place for people to come and to worship, to learn, to grow. And if everybody's guarded and trying to protect themselves from one another, that doesn't happen. So at some point, somebody has to look at the other people around them and say, okay, I'm going to believe in all of you. I'm going to put myself out there. I'm going to try. And then whatever happens with that happens. Now, if it's just one person, you know, maybe something happens with that, maybe something doesn't. Maybe people actually like gather around them and try to help them. I've seen that happen before at different churches. One that was particularly guarded and nobody was willing to talk about anything. And when somebody did finally come in and open up, everybody gathered around them to try to help. It was nice. I've also seen the other case where somebody showed up, said, this is my stuff, this is what's going on, and everyone was like, I don't know what to do with you.
Okay, now.
The point is that, you know, obviously that church didn't grow and they were dying anyways. It was a small church, only about 100 people. Most of them were very old, and as they died, the numbers decreased and did not replenish in any way, shape, or form. They were kind of in a spiral. Personally, I don't want to be the head of a church like that, or actually be involved with the leadership of a church like that. I've seen those, I've been there, I've been involved with a church like that. I worked as the one of the overseers for the youth group. I'm good. So, what I personally want to see, and what I feel is important moving forward for any church group, is that of something where compassion is a value that supersedes things like self-protection. If somebody shows up and they have a problem and they're actually willing to talk about it, because half the time when we've got people showing up and vocalizing things, they're trying, like they're desperate. Whereas most people don't. They show up and they just kind of like keep to themselves. They have to test the waters, make sure it's a safe place to talk before. But it's important for us to start showing people that same level of compassion and value. Because the truth is that every person has significant value. It doesn't matter who they are or what they've done. Even the worst pure people still have value. And more than that, this is a religion that focuses highly on change. And redemption is a big word that's thrown around a lot. You know, at this group, in the time that it's existed, we've had people who, like we had one guy who came who was a former pedophile. He had been guilty of that. He'd spent his life at this point trying to be free of that and be redeemed of it. You know, we've had people come in who, I mean, all the varied stories from prostitution to abuse to so many different things. And the purpose of which was so that they could find redemption, find salvation in the process of that. At the end of the day, we all want to be free of our pasts, and we want to be free of the pain and anguish that we go through. And I think on that particular level, that's something that we can all empathize with. We've all been hurt, every single one of us. We've all had people treat us like garbage at some point or another. I mean, if you're in the room and you've never had anybody treat you like crap, raise your hand and then take your other hand and slap yourself because you're lying. The thing is that there's a place for us to recognize that we've all got a lot of the same stories. You're afraid of people because you're afraid they're going to hurt you? Guess what? So are they.
Join the club. All right.
It's a big room full of that. Most churches are. Most churches are places where there have been lots of people who are hurt by the church. It's a thing. It's a vicious cycle that we all go through. And I think in that, it's important for us to start to recognize each other in this place, to know that we're all in the same boat and we are effectively on the same team. And if we're not on the same team, we need to check ourselves and figure out why. Do you have a problem that needs to be addressed? Then address it. Talk it through. It's not hard, it's not complicated. Yeah, it might be messy, but it's a simple concept. Because at the end, everybody wants to move forward in a way. Nobody wants to stay in one place and stagnate. And that doesn't sound good. Even though they might live that way, even though they might fight very, very hard to maintain that, they don't want it. They'll always tell you that they want to grow. And definitely nobody wants to regress. That's not really something that anybody seeks out. And what's more is if you find yourself as somebody that's strong, you should be helping those around you grow as well. Nobody's there, you know, nobody's arrived. They've ascended the mountain and now they're looking down at the others who are struggling to climb. But where we are is in different levels of growth. And in your growth, you're either going to throw shade over the ones growing near you and inhibit their growth, or you're going to grow in such a way that helps them get sunlight as well so they can grow too. It's kind of the choice that we live with. I was joking with Heather that it was really important that she came today to save everybody from the ridiculous number of Star Trek references that I had pertaining to this message. But it seems most of them have kind of fallen by the wayside to just share what's there. Except one. You know, when it comes down to leading people, I was given two very, very different examples. One of them involved the first officer off of a starship he was doing an officer exchange program, Riker for my fellow nerds, on the Klingon ship. And what happened was he went to this other ship, and a different culture, and they didn't understand certain things. And one of the characters in that other culture was talking about the dishonor that his dad had gone through. And, you know, this officer was just like, but he's your father. As this guy talked about how he had nothing to do with his dad at this point. And finally the guy sat down and was just like, you know, he was like, well, in our culture, we would never talk about this. We don't know how. To which the officer was just like, well, you know, before yesterday, I didn't know how to eat your food. Now I do. Simply saying, you know, things can change. The example being that he was able to meet them at their own level and begin to illustrate something new and different, something that they didn't understand. And that's very important for us. It's not, again, going back to that point about being right and about how a lot of us try to beat other people into learning. This guy didn't try to beat the other guy into learning. He simply made a point to illustrate, you know, look, we can all learn. We can all grow. Just because of where you've come from, it doesn't dictate how you're going to progress forward. Your past is your past. Your circumstance is your circumstance. But what you do from there is yours. The other example I was given was a guy showing up. He replaced the captain on the ship and basically went on a tyrannical raid. He changed duty rosters. He basically tried to force everybody on this science and exploration vessel into like a state of military readiness. All the while, very abrasively frustrating every single officer on board. At which point, he then proceeded to go into negotiations with this culture that they were potentially going to war with, and created this huge, like, blustering thing where he made the guy wait for a long time, and then came out and made up this elaborate explosive thing where he threw a temper tantrum and ran and walked away, and then went to the two other officers and was like, "Hey, okay, guys, now we got him. Look, now I'm gonna go hide in my ready room for a moment, and now you guys go tell him that, you know, I'm really mad, but you talked me down, and, you know, now I've agreed to talk to him again, but he can only bring 2 advisors and all this other stuff." Came up with this elaborate, like, ruse to try to manipulate the situation and establish dominance and so on. And the ship's counselor had the best line on that by explaining how when the guy walked off, the new captain, she explained how his whole thing was that he was very insecure and he was just compensating with bluster. See, we can either come at things from that more confident place of meeting people and learning, or we can come at it from a term of trying to force people into the specific direction that we feel that everyone needs to go. In one case, you might actually see fruit. That's good. In the other case, you might actually just end up looking like an abrasive ass who has to go through all kinds of hoops in order to try to get people to go anywhere. And there's nothing good about that. That's a lot of effort on your part, and that's a lot of people eventually realizing what you've done and maybe even like going against you as a result. See, to show up and care about people, and see both sides, I've seen a lot of people come at them for these reasons and with this logic, and their intentions were to care, but they didn't. They didn't show care for the other people. What they did was they instead alienated them or hurt them and just perpetuated the same cycles. So, again, the reason why this comes into the context of compassion is that compassion isn't focused on you, it's focused on them and you wanting to help them. If you want to help them, then help them. And sometimes that involves you not being the major thing here. You need to take a step back and meet them, and then you can both elevate from there. As opposed to you caring enough to show up and tell them what they need to do, and then demanding that they do it, coercing them to do it, forcing them to do it, manipulating them to do it, or whatever else you're going to use. You might get results, sure, but they're not going to be as good. And more importantly, when that person's left to decide again for themselves, you're either going to have to go through that whole process again to get them to make the right choice, or they're not going to make the right choice. Because the reality is that they never learned to do it for themselves. So, we'll move off into a time to pray here and whatnot. And the question I want to ask everybody is this. Where do you see yourself not getting it? Where do you see yourself not feeling like you can move forward with other people? Where do you feel that you're not understanding other people? What kind of blocks stand between you and the people around you? And that's it.